the benefits of doing art, like the benefits of coming in the morning to Cynthia's occupational therapy and memory. It gives yourself a boost. When you do art activity in the afternoon, it's probably good after lunch when you're probably feeling a little bit sluggish and tired. It's good for you to do art then, because then you open up your mind into creativity and your heart, your passion, your feelings. Bingo will definitely give you more because it's a little bit more lighthearted and fun and activity, but it's also mentally stimulating. So there's benefit to all these activities, and that's why we want to do them. And if you have requests for other activities, or more importantly, if you have ways of implementing other activities, I'm happy to keep you entertained and busy and occupied from morning to night. Yeah. There you go. Tomorrow, don't miss the beating. So tomorrow, let's just tell you what's on tomorrow, because I'll forget otherwise. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., come do your pearls of wisdom. Start the morning off with while you're fresh and your mind is working. Write down your memories, your pearls of wisdom, your advice for life. Do that at 9 o'clock till 9:30, just for half an hour. 9:30 to 10:30, Dr. Helen Kennedy will be here. She was here, Shame, last week on Tisha B'Av. I thought she knew it. We weren't on, but I apologize. In retrospect, that I didn't confirm with her that we won't be here. So we are going to be back tomorrow with Tuesday mornings. Physio, what does she do? Yoga, breathing, stretching, movement, dance, all that good stuff. Then at 10:30 to 11:30, I will give you a share, please God. Like I said, I want to go back into Israel, how Israel could defend itself, how Israel could win its wars. Then we got lunch, and then beating, fun. Wednesday morning, after Pearls, you're back into Tanya, and I think the Tale of Two Souls is just getting more and more interesting and more fascinating, digging deep into your spiritual self. And then we'll follow that with a shir on also Israel related, but more stuff with videos. And then on Thursday, fun physiotherapy in the morning, followed by shir, the prophecies of the time. Now we're going to the prophecies of comfort. And then will be bingo after lunch as well. So your day should be filled with good activities, keeping you dexterously well, mentally well. Let's say this: mind, body, and soul all looked after, and shkoyach. All right, let's go now into something a little bit more different. Now, I know Tu B'Av most people think of as a Jewish Valentine's Day, as a day of Jewish romance. In fact, I'm reminded of the joke about the young couple who was called to heaven before they could be married. Unfortunately, sometimes it happens. That's why when I would go to Nando's and they ask what kind of Coke, you want the diet? I said, no, I don't want to die yet. So we got to just stay young, right? Anyways, this couple was called up to heaven at a young age. And the disappointed groom, he turns to God and says, how could you do this to us? We were planning to get married. We were making all the plans and preparations, Shepston Gardens, Riva Catering. Come on, how could you do that? God says, listen, I'm afraid, you just arrived here. You got to wait a little bit. Okay, wait. God says, spend some more time with each other in paradise and see if you still want to get married, then we could talk about it. So 5 years passed and the couple come back to God. They say, please, we really want to get married. God said, okay, I'm sorry you had to wait all this time, but 5 more years you got to wait. Just see if you really want it. And I got to tell you, on a more serious note, I had a couple come into my office a year ago. They come into my office. They want to get married. So you just met Friday night at my Shabbos table. You know each other? He's from a different country. No, we know. When you know. I said, I've heard that one before. Anyways, if you want to get married, you could fill out the based-in forms. I suggest you spend some more time getting to know each other. And I was going to the rabbi's conference. So I said, okay, when I'm back from the rabbi's conference, we could talk. I arrive at the rabbi's conference the next day. I get a message from him. It's World War. Oh, no. The first day, the message was, unbelievable. It's incredible. We love each other. We're getting married as soon as you're back from the rabbi's conference. I said, hold your horses, fill out the forms, do what you got to do. The next day, I get a message that they are in war with each other. Anyways, you know how it goes. That's unfortunately, that's why the importance of course to get to know each other is all important parts of I would say you don't need to have a very long engagement per se. But anyways, I'm not here to give marriage advice today. But I think get to know each other, regardless of age and stage. Don't think it's only young people struggling. I'm dealing with a couple right now, and a 90-year-old man who's in the process of getting divorced. Cynthia knows. Huh? You got to be married to get divorced, But you married the love of your life, and I know you feel your feelings always continued for him. But don't think it's only the young. That's what I say. What do you say? I hear it depends who's called. Right. You know who? What's that Jewish comedian's name? He said he got married by a judge. He should have asked for a jury. Groucho Marx, right? Anyways, this couple, where was I holding in the Maisele? They come to God, please, we want to get married. They know they want to get married. Okay, fine. God says, all right, no problem. We'll take care of you. They have this beautiful wedding in heaven, in paradise. They're so happy. But of course, what happens the day after they get married? The trouble begins. Okay, they realized that they made a big mistake. Yeah, all this time. So they say, okay, God, they need to get divorced. God says, It took 10 years for me to find a rabbi in heaven. Now you want me to find a lawyer in heaven? Okay, sorry. And no lawyers here, right? What, marriage preparation. Okay, we could do it at any time. But let's talk today about what is Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is a Jewish festival. If you were at Shul this morning, we didn't say Tachnun, not yesterday at Mincha, not this morning, not at Shema last night, and nor will we at Mincha this afternoon. In fact, if you come to my Shul for Mincha Ma'ariv this afternoon at 5:45, we'll have extra snacks and extra l'chaims just to celebrate this special day. But you're wondering, what are we celebrating? Why is Ronnie coming to play music today? So let me take you through it. The 15th of Av is perhaps the most underestimated and often overlooked day in the Jewish calendar. Now, I had a good friend, many of you may have known him, Alex Marini, of blessed memory. Alex had a big deal about Tu B'Av, not just for the young, but for the old. Alex came here on Tu B'Av many times and insisted on giving a nicer lunch. And Tu B'Shvat and Tu B'Av were his two favorite holidays. In 2010, on Tu B'Shvat, he gave everybody trees to take home to plant. And then he wanted to make shidduchim, marriage arrangements at the seniors club. Yeah, and don't think it doesn't happen. We've had a couple of shidduchim come out of our Chabad seniors club, believe it or not. Last year, actually not last year, earlier this year, I officiated 3 seniors' weddings. Now, last year, November 1 and twice in February this past year. Yeah, believe it or not. At Sandingham Gardens, this guy came here to talk to me. I said, what are you talking about? Anyways, some of you might be familiar with it. And I had 3 weddings that I officiated of people in their 80s. So don't think it's ever too late. You can always find your love. He, I believe, has been married a few times before. In fact, to a member of our club, but she was never married before. So like I said, things can happen regardless of age and stage. But the most famously known matter about Tu B'Av, which is why we're talking about marriages, but I don't want to be stuck there, is that it's the day when marriage-minded singles would attend these great social events in Jerusalem, of all places, in the vineyards of Jerusalem. But people don't know, why was this day chosen as this romantic matchmaking day, as some like to call it, the Jewish Valentine's Day, but this preceded Valentine's, and therefore we have to talk about it. What is it that this day signifies that makes it into such a special day? And so today I'm not going to focus on that part. Like I said, I'm going to talk more than just the romance, but I want to go into some of the deeper meaning of Tu B'Av, and we'll circle it back to romance. So if you are keen to enhance your relationships, or if you know others are, you can inspire them. But we all have relationships that we're in. We all have our sphere of influence. There are many relationships in our life, and we want that any relationship we're in, whether it is a romantic marriage or a non-romantic marriage or a non-marriage, whatever it is, every relationship could learn from these lessons. So let's first go into the Medrash. The Medrash talks about what was special about this day. Now I want to go back for a second. I see I put the slide in the wrong place. Let's go back to last week. Last week was Tisha B'Av, the saddest day in our calendar. When did the sad day of Tisha B'Av begin? Well, when did Tisha B'Av become the sad day? Was it, pardon? Oh, it was in the desert when the spies, the Meraglim, came back and gave a negative report about the Holy Land. So now that's the first Tisha B'Av. So now we could go into the first Tu B'Av in the Gemara. Okay? I put all the texts in here for you so that we could discuss it in the text. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, this is in Tractate Tainus, Daf Chav Vav Amud Beis, 26b. He says as follows, Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael. There were no greater or happier days for Israel kechamisha asa ba'av than the 15th of Av. You hear this? Today was the happiest day for the Jewish people on the calendar. And what's the other day? Yom Kippur. Why? Oh, good. Clive, what would we do without you? We need the why. Why? It's a good question. Now, the truth is, I can understand why Yom Kippur. It's a day we were atoned. We were forgiven. Isn't that a day to be happy? Now, I know you think of Yom Kippur as an austere day. We can't eat. We can't drink. We can't have our coffee. Although I know a guy who sponsored in Shul de Bracha, those caffeine tablets. What do they call them? Okay, just joking. But the point is, if Yom Kippur is such a serious day, yet it is also a happy day. You have to think about what the joy of Yom Kippur is, that it's a day we're forgiven for our sins. Again, that goes back also, not just the Tisha B'Av, but the 3 weeks before that, the 17th of Tammuz, which started off on the day of the worshiping of the golden calf. But let's read it in the Gemara. Says the Talmud, for on those days, the daughters of Jerusalem would go out dressed in white garments. Now, I don't know. I never grew up with this in New York. But I'm told that in Joburg, there used to be a ball, a Matzah Yom Kippur. People would go to this breaking of the fast party, and they'd all be dressed in white already from Yom Kippur. And it was a very romantic event where everybody would connect and bond, and there would be nice shidduchim matchmaking that was made on that day. Okay, but the Gemara says more so. It wasn't their own garments. They would borrow garments. Why? Because if you come into the party and say, ooh, that one's dressed in the most expensive Gucci, Armani, Versace, maybe you want to marry for money. They say it's easier to borrow from the bank than to marry for money. Okay, but never mind. People think marry for money. So the Talmud is telling us on these 2 days they had these romantic events. And you didn't know who was rich or poor. What would they say? Because you didn't know whose garment was what. It could be the person wearing the fanciest garment, borrowed it from the Gemach or borrowed it from a friend. Whereas, what's the name? I don't see here. Okay. So the Gemara says, what would they say? Young men, raise your eyes and see whom you choose for yourself. Don't pay attention to beauty. Pay attention to family. As it says, Sheker achem v'hevel hayofi, charm is false and beauty is futile. Isha yirat Hashem, but a God-fearing woman is to be praised. And it continues to nula mipri yadeh, give her from the fruit of her hands. Asher memaseh, her deeds will praise her in the gates. So, oh wait, the Gemara continues here. Also, it says, "Se'ena or ena benos Yerushalayim, benos Tzion, go out, O daughters of Zion, and gaze upon King Solomon, upon the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his nuptials and on the day of, the joy of his heart." Quoting from Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. And the sages expounded, they said, the days of his nuptials, this is the giving of the Torah. The day of the joy of his heart, this is the building of the temple. May it be speedily built in our days. Amen. Very interesting how the Talmud throws in a quick prayer there. So the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Gemara here asserts that the 15th of Av was indeed the greatest festival of the year, akin to Yom Kippur. Now, what was so special of the day? Well, the Gemara tells us this is a day the singles went out to seek partners in marriage. Just as Yom Kippur, the holiest day, was also chosen for the same purpose. These 2 days, you can imagine why they were so happy. The day after, we know, after they found the marriage partner, forget about it. That was a disaster. Okay, joke aside. Now, in other words, it was marked as a great day of joy, and that's why it was chosen for matchmaking, not the other. It seems that because it was a day of matchmaking, why it was so joyous. But the Talmud is telling us the other way around. Because it was such a joyous day, that's why it was a day chosen for matchmaking. So what happened on this day? What happened on the 15th of Av to designate it as the greatest Jewish holiday, that it was used, that it was a day for matchmaking, right? What made it so special? Yom Kippur and the 15th of Av. So the Talmud actually relates no less than 6 historical events that occurred on the 15th of Av. 6 events. Now, of course, anyone who is familiar with Jewish law and its attitude to modesty and boundaries between genders wonders, what is this? A day you go out into the vineyards and the girls dance and the boys look and see, who am I going to marry? So in truth, it's for this reason that this practice was only done in the times of the temple, and only on the day that was as great as Yom Kippur, on a holiday that a holiday of great holiness that was focused on joy, when there was nothing but the purest of noble intentions. So this is a day that was focused, because it's such a special day. That's why this day was chosen for this matchmaking. Now, unlike other holidays where there was a need to actually appoint people, there was Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. You familiar with that? In about, 6 weeks? In 8 weeks' time, 8 weeks from today will be the holiday of Sukkot. So 8 weeks from today, on the holiday of Sukkot, there is a special celebration in Jerusalem called Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. We actually observe it here in South Africa as well. That's when the rain starts to come. But it's also the time when they would draw water. It's a very special holiday. But at the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, there were special watchmen. They were appointed to watch the festivities and to ensure that there wasn't any inappropriate, promiscuous behavior, because there was a lots of people coming, and the young boys and girls, they don't want anyone getting up to hanky-panky, So but on Tu B'Av, they didn't have to appoint these people because it was such a special day. It was befitting for matchmaking, and we're going to talk about that, what made it so special. And if you think about it, we read the words here in the Talmud. What did the Talmud say? They would say, young man, raise your eyes and see who you choose for yourself, right? You see that? That's what the women, that had these holy and noble intentions, and they were telling the men, raise your eyes. What do you mean raise your eyes? Look up to heaven. Focus on the spiritual intention of marriage, and you'll have the clarity for a successful and a beautiful relationship. See who you choose. Look up to heaven. That it should be more spiritually focused than focusing just on the superficial and on vanity. Okay? So we see this idea, and it's a very important and fascinating one. But let's go into the Talmud, into the Talmud a little bit further to understand this. So it was a day of holiness, a day of Yom Kippur is a day of matchmaking. Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. That's what made it very a perfect day afterwards, to have the noble intentions to find the right match. And this day was also a very holy day, which we have to understand what made it so holy. So let's look into the Gemara about what made this day, today, the 15th of Av, such a holy day. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, there were no happier days for Israel than today, than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. So he explains, I can understand Yom Kippur being a festive day. Why? Well, we said, because there's atonement, there's pardon and forgiveness. Shouldn't you be happy if you've been forgiven? Imagine a person standing before a court and he knows he's in trouble, and then he gets acquitted for his misdemeanors or for his worse yet behavior. Yeah, isn't that happiness? It's like a relief from that anxiety, from the stress of what is in store. Will I be incarcerated? Will I be in trouble with the law? So we understand why that's good. But the second set, another reason, which you go back further in history, how did Yom Kippur become a day of atonement? The Gemara says that's the day God gave the second set of tablets, right? So it's a day of forgiveness. But the Gemara asks, what is the significance of Tu B'Av? Rabbi Yehuda, now we're going to have a bunch of opinions here, so we're going to run through them. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, again, another important point, when instead of plagiarizing, when you know something comes from someone, give them the credit, okay? So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, it is the day when the tribes were permitted to intermarry. What does that mean? By the way, intermarry doesn't mean to marry out of the Jewish faith. Let's correct that quickly. Intermarry means between the tribes. Now we know that it was decreed that the tribes should only marry amongst themselves. Why? We had it in last week's parsha, the daughters of Tzlafchad. Tzlafchad had 5 daughters, yeah, and he passed away. So now the Jews are coming to the land of Israel. They don't know what's going to be. How are they going to divide up the land? Because it was divided up patrilineally, not matrilineally. But if their father's dead, how are they going to get a portion? So Moshe brought their claim to God, and Hashem said, give them a portion. But to prevent estates being transferred to from one tribe to another, the complications involved, people should marry within their own tribe. And that was, at that stage, the easier way to go. Rav Yosef said, in the name of Rav Nachman, I guess when they had a shidduch crisis, they opened it up and said, all right, we can marry other tribes. But there's another thing that happened on this day. It's the day in which the tribe of Benjamin was allowed to re-enter the congregation. What does that mean? Anyone familiar? It's a very famous story in Tanakh, in the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges. Pelegesh Begiva. Anyone familiar with that story? A terrible story. I don't want to go through all the details of it now. We did a share on that once a long time ago. But there was a man who came with his concubine, and they were in the territory of Benjamin, in a city called Giva. And this woman was, let's say, very inappropriately treated. And because of that behavior that took place that day, the Jewish people said, we are punishing the tribe of Benjamin because no one there defended this woman, and nobody will marry into that tribe. They obviously are misguided, misdirected. We don't want our children marrying into such people, even though there are people. It's like that relative. You won't let your kids marry that relative. Yeah? No, I can't stand that brother-in-law. We're not going to let anyone marry them. So no Jews married anyone from the tribe of Benjamin. What happened though? With time, we can imagine that it wasn't very good, and the tribe of Benjamin was ostracized by the Jewish community. It wasn't a good situation. So eventually, that ban was terminated on what day? Today, Tu B'Av. Rabbi Bar Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it is the day when the people of the desert cease to die. Now, I don't know why this comes, if you're going in chronological order, it should have gone sooner. Because if you know the story of the Meraglim, the spies we were talking about, that was the original Tisha B'Av. It was decreed that a whole generation should die. What day did they come back with the report about Israel? On the 8th of Av. By the way, is it getting cut off? Seems to be getting cut off. I'm not sure why. It was on the 8th of Av. So what day was it decreed that they won't enter the land and all of that generation would die out? On Tisha B'Av. That means anyone under age 20 died in the desert. Over age 20. Apologies. Thank you. See, I need to make sure that everybody's awake. I'm going to throw lots of mistakes in. I'm going to throw lots of them. And whoever corrects me correctly, you'll win a prize. Thank you. So after the sin of the spies, thank you for that. For the next 39 years, the people kept dying. That corresponded with the 40 days of their sojourn, of their scouting the land. Now, after 40 years, when the people stopped dying, it was realized that the decree was over. What day was that? They dug their graves on Tisha B'Av. The people that were 60 years old, they went into their graves and they said, hey, I woke up. It's like I check in the morning on the JHB Chev. My name's not on the Chev website. Thank God I'm alive. Okay, I'm coming to work today. So they checked the Chev website. Are we there? No, we're not on the Chev website. No funeral for me today. Thank God. And after a few days of no funeral for themselves, they realized that this decree had stopped. It was over. And so they declared this day a festival. What day was that? 5 days after Tisha B'Av, 15th of Av, Tu B'Av, today. Okay, let's go to one more. Actually, two more. Two more. Ula, huh? 6 days, you're right. You see, I'm making sure you're counting properly. Ula, no, but it was 5 more days in the grave. The 6th day was already Tu B'Av. Ula says it is the day on which Hoshea, the son of Elah, removed the guards that Yeravam ben Nevat had stationed on the roads to prevent the Israelites from visiting the temple on festivals. He proclaimed they may go up and serve whatever they wish. Okay, this is again another important point. You have to understand there's some sad times in Jewish history. Last year we were on the verge of collapse, and October 7th finished us off some time. Jewish people were not getting along very well. And this is not news. It's happened before in our history. Many, many years ago, there was a split amongst the Jews. There was the kingdom of Solomon. His family split. So it was the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Yehuda. The Jews split in two. And one of the kings at the time, Yeravam ben Nevat, had placed blocks, roadblocks, preventing Jews from going to Jerusalem. Could you imagine that? From worshiping Hashem in the temple. And it was on this day that the king at that time, Hoshea ben Elah, he removed those roadblocks and allowed the Jews, his own people, to return to go to Jerusalem. So that day was declared a holiday. Next, Rav Masna said it's the day in which the dead of Beitar were allowed to be buried. Again, this is also relevant not only to Tu B'Av, but it's also relevant to this week's Parsha. Why is that? After the Bar Kokhba revolt, Bar Kokhba was one who was considered Mashiach at his time. After the destruction of the temple, Bar Kokhba tried to restore Jewish sovereignty in Israel. And he succeeded in creating a major, major revolt against the Romans. Unfortunately, though, the Romans sent in all their reserves and they crushed that revolt. And they didn't even allow the dead people who were murdered in Beitar, which was one of the strongholds of the revolt against the Romans, to be buried. A year later, they finally allowed them to be buried. And the miracle was that the bodies, you would think, they would decompose. Who knows what would happen to them over the year? There would be termites and parasites and all the other terrible things and worms. But the Gemara says a miracle occurred. And over that year, none of those, that was on Tisha B'Av, by the way, then it happened. But they allowed them to be buried a year later on Tu B'Av. So it was another reason why they celebrated in this day. And in fact, they instituted a special, an extra blessing, Hatov HaMeitiv, which is part of benching, which is this week's Parsha talks about benching. So you could see the connection, not only the time period, but also this week's Parsha telling us about being grateful to God for the good food that Hashem provides. So that's another reason. The final reason I want to focus on, and I really think I'm not going to have enough time to really delve too deep into it, so maybe tomorrow we'll continue with this depending on time. But the final reason here is Rabbah and Rav Yosef, two sages, said, it is on this day, Tu B'Av, on which they stopped chopping wood for the wood pile of the altar. What does that mean? The Gemara says it was taught. Rabbi Lezer Hagadol said, from the 15th of Av onwards, from today in Israel, today is when the strength of the sun diminishes in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite. Now the days are starting to get longer and the nights shorter. Starts already now. But in Israel and everywhere else in the northern hemisphere, the days are starting to get shorter. The summer is winding down. September is already fall, autumn. Here it will be spring in 2 weeks. There will be autumn. And so the Gemara says, therefore they would stop chopping wood for the pile on the altar. Not only that, Rav Menashe said, that day was called the day of the breaking of the axe. I don't know if you heard, Matisyahu's got a song, chop them down, chop them down. Maybe I should play it for you tomorrow. Give you some entertainment, some Matisyahu. So what is the day of the breaking of the axe? They call it in Hebrew, Yom Tavar Magal, the day of the breaking of the axe. What does it mean, the day of the breaking of the axe? You ever heard of such a day? Breaking of the axe day? It was, Oh, it's an axiom. Very good. So in total here, we have very good. We have 6 reasons for the greatness of this day that are listed in the Talmud, and you can see them right here. Number 1, just to recap, right? Each one is a reason to celebrate, and certainly the 6 together make this day deserving of commemoration. So to review them very quickly, we said that the tribes were permitted to intermarry amongst each other. The tribe of Benjamin was allowed to re-enter the congregation of Israel. They weren't allowed because of their inappropriate conduct. Now they were re-accepted and re-embraced. Number 3, please correct me if I make mistakes. People ceased to die in the desert. What day was that? Tu B'Av, after Tisha B'Av. Number 4, we said it was the day you were able to go back to worship God in Jerusalem after Yeravam and Nevat, who was a wicked king of Israel, had placed those roadblocks, and now they were allowed by Hoshea to go to Jerusalem. How long? I don't know. It was a long time. I don't remember the number of years. Google it. I'll check it up in Tanakh later. Maybe Rebbetzin Miriam was very well versed in Tanakh, knows. How many years were they prevented from going to Jerusalem by their own kings? By the way, that was only the kings. What's that, 6 years? How many? Can I hear you? Okay. It's good to know. But it was only the kingdom, it was only the tribes, the 10 tribes who lived on the other side. Those who lived in the neighborhoods of Yehuda and Shomron were allowed to go. We'll go 10 more minutes, and then Ronnie's going to take over. Okay. And then we said the dead of Beitar were able to be buried. And number 6, they stopped chopping wood for the wood pile of the altar. And that's really the main discussion I want to have, which if we don't have enough time today, I want to continue tomorrow because I think it's a very important point. So, what's so special about this? And in fact, I'm going to focus on number 6. I'm not even going to focus on the others. Okay, we don't have enough time. All these events are obviously noteworthy, but the last one, I mean, all of them, it says our holiday, very special holy day. What did he say? There was no more festive day in Israel's calendar like the 15th of Av. Ronnie comes to play music for us on special holidays. What's so special about this day? A day that the Talmud compared to Yom Kippur. Ronnie won't play for us on Yom Kippur. Maybe he will. But today is like Yom Kippur. So what's so special? And the answer is something very interesting that the Gemara said, the 6th answer, the 6th reason, it's the day of the annual culmination of chopping wood. And that was one of the most significant special events of this day. So we wonder what's so special about chopping wood that makes this very special. Now, though the Mishnah itself didn't give any reason for the holiday, we can deduce there's something very special here about this chopping of the wood, and especially, I forgot to put this in here, what the Mishnah said, go out, daughters of Zion, and gaze. Well, what is this all about? The Mishnah tells us that this day was like the day of the wedding. What does it mean, the day of the wedding of King Solomon? King Solomon is a reference in Shir HaShirim. Although it's a romantic story of a man and a woman, our sages tell us the man references who's the king, Hashem, and the woman refers to Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people. So King Solomon wrote in this metaphorical way about his own relationship with his own romantic relationships, comparing it to the relationship of God and the Jewish people. So the Medrash tells us what's the joy of his heart. That was a reference to the temple, the Beis HaMikdash that he built. And the commentaries explain that on the 15th of Av was a tremendous day of celebration. It's understood that it's an event which contributed to the building of the temple in a very important way. In what way? Well, the Talmud said on this day they would chop wood, or they would stop chopping wood for the temple stockpile in order to offer sacrifices. So there has to be something very significant to compare this to Yom Kippur. There must be something very, very special about it. What exactly was this yearly grand finale of chopping the wood all about? And why was it at the heart of this unsurpassed celebration of Tu B'Av? So let me take you back into a little bit of the history of Israel. When the Holy Temple stood in Jerusalem, the first temple stood for 410 years, and the second temple, after a 70-year break, was rebuilt, and it lasted a total of 420 years. So, one of the main features of the temple, today we pray, but back in the temple, how did you worship God? You offered sacrifices. So, how did you offer sacrifices? What did it entail? Well, there was an altar upon which the sacrifices were offered. There were different types of sacrifices. Animals, people brought oxen, people brought sheep, right? So there were different types of animals brought. And then, how did you offer the sacrifice? What did you need in order to bring your burnt offering? Fire, very good. Now, what keeps the fire going? Wood. Oh, so now we understand. Now let's go into a little bit of the climate in Israel, a little different than here. Oh, similar in a sense, actually, because our summer season, which is the winter in Israel, is rainy. But our winter is dry, and Israel's summer is dry, but it's similar season, right? So here's a very interesting thing. The annual cutting, in order to cut the firewood for the altar, when would that begin? It would begin in the month of Nisan, which is spring in Israel. Chodesh Aviv, when we celebrate Pesach. So I imagine Pesach, they were probably busy getting ready for Pesach, or maybe they would start chopping wood even before Pesach, because there was a lot of sacrifices brought. Before Pesach, we did a little interesting read of history here. We read Josephus' description of one of the last Pesachs in Israel, and he describes about 3 million Jews converging on Jerusalem in the annual pilgrimage. It was probably the busiest time, and everybody would offer the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb. 3 million Jews in the year 69 or 70 of the Common Era, because the temple was destroyed in July, August of the year 70 in the Common Era. Is a debate of exactly if it was 69 or 70, but either way, whichever one it was, Josephus describes the last Pesach, about 3 million Jews made the pilgrimage. Now, from where? From all over. From all over Israel. There were Jews living in Iraq. There were Jews living in Lebanon. There were Jews living in Syria. There were Jews living in India. And even further out countries. Just imagine today, everybody coming to Jerusalem to celebrate the holiday, offer the sacrifice. Now, until when did they chop the wood? From Nisan until 15th of Av, today, right? You see it on the screen. So past this date, the summer heat waned coming from this date, and the wood was considered too moist and too warmy to be used for the altar. So they would stop chopping wood today. So the conclusion of the wood chopping wasn't just, okay, we finished, we stopped chopping wood, that's it. No, they had a whole celebration. Chop him down, chop him down. Are you going to sing that for us, Ronnie? Chop him down. From the forest itself comes the handle for the axe. Anyways, it wasn't just stop, cold turkey, done. There was a whole celebration, the culmination of the wood chopping. And there was tremendous fanfare and included a whole ceremonial, a ceremony. They would actually break the axes, which why they called this day by its name, which was in Hebrew, or I don't know if it's Hebrew or Aramaic, but they called it Yom Tavar Mago, the day of the breaking of the axes. And they had the ceremony where they broke the axes. Now, in general, why would they break the axes? It's not a Jewish thing to break things. We don't like to be destructive. So maybe we could spend a little bit more time, and I'll put the text in tomorrow, but I want to actually explain to you the breaking of the axe. You know that in order that in the temple, we weren't allowed to have any metal. No metal was used in the construction of the temple or in any parts of it. There was gold, there was wood, but there was no metal. Why? Because metal was considered a lethal weapon in those days. Metal was considered a lethal weapon. So the commentaries explain that the completion of the cutting of the wood was when they finished a very big mitzvah. The mitzvah was facilitating there should be wood to offer the sacrifices. So they had feasting and rejoicing. And any mitzvah that you finish studying a book of Gemara, you finish studying a tractate of Talmud, what would you do? You finish celebrating, you finish reading the Torah. What day did we finish reading the Torah? Shmini Atzeret. So what do? We dance, we celebrate. Last year, Simchas Torah was turned into a very sad day on October 7th. Into Tisha B'Av. We hope that now the tragedy gets turned around. So the point is that there was a tremendous celebration in preparing the wood, but you didn't keep the metal because metal was considered a lethal weapon. So while the axes are good for chopping wood, for facilitating the sacrifices, but we didn't keep that. And in order to say we're using it for a mitzvah, but not for any other reason, they would break the axes. Okay? Very interesting. So they break the axis. What's that? Maybe they kept the handle. Another thing is that something that's used for this mitzvah, they didn't want it to be misused for any other reason. So it would be broken. Okay, but let's just summarize. We said after Tu B'Av, it would be too moist to be used for the altar. But of course, we're still wondering what makes this day so special that, in fact, we didn't have such a big celebration about the wood itself, but we had a celebration for the day they finished chopping the wood. Something seems a little bit amiss here. So let's read one or two more texts before we go to lunch. Here is the Gemara Baba Basra. Rabbi Shmuel says, on the day that they finished cutting the wood, there was rejoicing, being that it was the day on which they completed such a great mitzvah. But we still need to understand, cutting the wood to be used for firewood, right? All the offerings that were brought were consumed on the Mizbeach, on the altar flame, right? That's an important mitzvah. But there was no major celebration. Why does this day get this, title? Especially when they brought an actual korban, they didn't celebrate as much. But when they finished cutting the wood, that was such a big celebration. Now, to bring a korban, we know offering a sacrifice is a big mitzvah. The word korban, what does it mean besides for sacrifice? Karav means to come close. When you brought a sacrifice, you came closer to Hashem, which, by the way, in our own relationships is an important lesson. You want to have a deeper relationship with our loved ones? It takes some sacrifice. If I'm sitting in my own cocoon all day, if I'm minding my own business, I can't cultivate that relationship. The only way you can cultivate a relationship. And on that note, I'm going to say happy anniversary to Rebbe Miriam. Today's your anniversary, so happy anniversary. On an anniversary, it's a good time to renew our vows. And in every relationship, I'm not just talking about marriages. You want to cultivate, whether it's at work. The only thing at work is you don't have to see your coworkers. It doesn't matter. It's not the most important relationships. It's important to be good. But our loved ones, those are relationships that should be inextricable, that should be inseparable. And therefore, we do have to sacrifice. We have to sacrifice time to bond with our loved ones, whoever they may be, whether it's a spouse or children or grandchildren or friends or relatives. You want to sacrifice time. If you don't sacrifice time, you can never cultivate those relationships. You have to sacrifice your money in order to buy a drink for somebody you're treating out. A coffee costs you a couple of bucks, but it creates a bond, a connection. What about for Hashem? Shouldn't we sacrifice some time for God? What about sacrificing for kosher? What about, it's cheaper to buy Pick and Pay, but it's not kosher. Hashem wants you to keep kosher. Sacrifice to observe Shabbos. These all require sacrifices. Perhaps later on we could talk about the next level, which is not just sacrificing, but cultivating an even deeper relationship, which would be Ketores, the incense that was offered deeper in the sanctuary. But that's not for today's discussion. But just to conclude for today, we're wondering, the korban itself was a tremendous mitzvah. You got closer to God. But other than the sacrifice and the sacrificial meat, depending on which sacrifice was being offered, that you got to enjoy, there was no major celebration involved. But here, there's a big celebration for finishing to chop the wood. So give me 5 more minutes here. I want to just do this last text and then we'll be finishing. We'll go to music and lunch. The general culmination of wood cutting for the altar was something that wasn't just celebrated by the individual. The individual could eat the meat of a sacrifice and celebrate. But here, all of Israel celebrated this day, Tu B'Av. So we have to understand what this is all about. And in fact, it takes a little bit of of history. It wasn't something that existed in the first temple, but only in the second temple. When the Jewish people returned to the land of Israel after the 70-year exile in Babylonia, in which time the Purim story occurred during those 70 years. In fact, it was somewhat related that Achashverosh miscalculated the 70 years and thought, the Jews will never return. But as they began to resettle the land, in fact, many of the Jews who stayed in Israel at the time were completely impoverished, okay? And they faced many obstacles and hardships. I'll tell you another interesting fact. More Jews remained outside of Israel than inside of Israel during the Second Temple. Today, are there more Jews in Israel or outside Israel? Outside Israel. Okay, so it's not hard for us to fathom. Temple was destroyed. The people were exiled. They were dispersed around the world. There were more Jews living in exile, in diaspora, than in Israel. In fact, when Ezra and Nehemiah brought Jews back from Babylon and Iran, Persian Empire, there were only 42,000 Jews who accompanied them, besides for the Jews who were already living in Israel, who never were exiled. Who was exiled? A Kohen Amashul this morning was telling us they took the prominent people. They took the Kohanim out of Israel. They didn't care about the poor schleppers who, Jews who stayed in Israel. You could stay there. They didn't want the Jews to regain prominence. Who allowed the Jews to return to Israel? Darius and Cyrus. Darius is Daryavish, the son of Queen Esther. Okay? But the Jews were still in a precarious position. And unlike the gold gilded glory of the first temple built by King Solomon, which obviously was renovated over the years. In fact, the second temple only became so magnificent after Herod renovated it, but that's already 300 years later. The second temple only reached its peak magnificence in its last 100 so years. I don't know how long it lasted. I believe he renovated it in the year, 60 before the Common Era. So it lasted about 110 years. My years might be off, but I believe Herod was about a century before the temple was destroyed. But we're talking about now 300 years before that, when they were rebuilding the temple. And they couldn't build it so magnificently as the first temple was. In fact, they built a very simple structure made of stone and mortar. And the temple treasury didn't even have enough funds to afford to pay for the firewood for the altar to offer sacrifices, which you could say was probably one of the main purposes. The central function of the temple was to offer sacrifices. So what did they do? How did they deal with this crisis? How did they resolve it? So the Gemara tells us here that there were a few families that came along, and each of them donated a large quantity of firewood. And when the supply brought by one family was exhausted, guess what? Another family would bring their donation of firewood. So different families would chop wood. There was a few families. And in this way, I think it was 8 families or 9 families who supplied all the wood that was critical for the first year of the Beis HaMikdash's existence, the second temple's existence. Of course, as more Jews came back to Israel, and as Jews built themselves up again after the destruction, after the Holocaust, European Jewry was decimated. A couple of years later now, we have some wealthy Jews. Yeah? Takes some time. So to reward their generosity, this is what the text 4 says. The prophets of the time, they instituted a date when each family had their fixed date in the temple calendar, that they would bring the wood for the temple, and the donation was accompanied by a tremendous celebration. In fact, the Gemara says very interestingly, there were 9 families. Can you read it here? It says there were 9 times during the year when the Kohanim and the people would bring wood for the wood pile on the altar. And the Mishnah goes on to list those days. And the Mishnah says here, Rashi says, 9 on these dates, the Kohanim and the people would donate wood and offer up a sacrifice, even if there was plenty of wood available. Because remember, with time, they replenished and they had plenty of money. But to acknowledge, to recognize who stood up to the plate when the temple's coffers were empty. It's very nice to give when everybody's giving, when it's fun, when it's cool to give. But what about when it's not so cool? What about when the temple's coffers are empty? Therefore, they were recognized. And just to conclude text 4, the Gemara says something very interesting. Why was it necessary to establish special times for offering wood? And it tells us the story here in great detail. But there's one remaining point that I wanted to make, but let me finish with this final point. And this point is as follows. It was such a special holiday, the day that the people gave, that if Tisha B'Av was Nidche, what does it mean, Tisha B'Av Nidche? Not this year, but other years, when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos. You remember Tisha B'Av falling out on Shabbos? Last year, the year before we had it. It happens, it's common. When Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, so when do we fast? You can't fast on Shabbos unless it's Yom Kippur. When do we fast? Sunday. It's called Tisha B'Av Nidche. However, these families never fasted on that Sunday if that Sunday was their day. And obviously there was a family who would bring their wood on that day, the 10th of Av. Why did they fast on Tisha B'Av during the time of the second temple? Because it was already a sad day. They fasted because of the destruction of the first temple. They fasted because of the other tragic event that we discussed last week that happened on Tisha B'Av. So let's read it in the words of the Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok related that he says, I'm a descendant of Sanab of the tribe of Benjamin. One year, Tisha B'Av fell on Shabbos, and it was postponed until Sunday. We began fasting, but did not complete the fast since it was our special Yom Tov. So I guess they began fasting probably on Saturday night when Tisha B'Av began. But on Sunday, that family had a break from the fast. And Rashi tells us, a descendant of Sanab, they were a family from the tribe of Benjamin who during the time of Ezra were allotted the day, the 10th of Av, to donate wood to the wood pile on the altar. That day was always a holiday for them, and they always did it on the 10th of Av. So again, we see something fascinating that you even postponed Tisha B'Av in order for this family to celebrate this day. So of course, we're left with the question, what was so special about this day that it even postponed Tisha B'Av? And come join us tomorrow. I feel compelled to continue this discussion tomorrow because I think it's a very special lesson that we could learn about the wood chopping. And of course, that will segue us back into our discussion about Israel in contemporary times. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Interesting. 190 years, that long. Wow. Okay, so ladies and gents, please enjoy our concert with Ronnie now. Ronnie, we're doing it here in lunch. Okay, let's do it while they're getting served lunch. And tomorrow we will continue. Thank you, Ronnie.